Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. The Harry Potter universe isn't just about magic, mysteries, and thrilling adventures. It's also a collection of incredibly convenient coincidences. Of course, that's typical for any fictional world. Sometimes the plot demands a few contrivances to keep the story moving, but certain events in J.K. Rowling's world are so perfectly timed, they feel almost comical. Today, we'll break down some of the most obvious cases of magical luck. Moments where the circumstances were so suspiciously convenient, it felt like the spells themselves were nudging the plot in the right direction. Enjoy the video. Number 1. Harry and Sirius forget about the mirrors. Sirius Black's fate in Order of the Phoenix could have been completely different, if only someone had remembered the two-way mirror. Sirius gives Harry this artifact as a quick way to communicate, but Harry forgets about it entirely, until the very end. When Voldemort tricks Harry into thinking Sirius is in danger, the boy rushes to the Department of Mysteries without verifying anything. Naturally, Sirius follows and dies. The entire tragedy hinges on the fact that two people, desperate to reach each other, don't use the one object designed exactly for that. Even Sirius forgets it exists, though he could have dispelled Voldemort's illusion in seconds. Drama was required, so the mirror vanishes from the narrative, and logic disappears with it. Number 2. Sirius learns about Pettigrew from a newspaper. Another wildly convenient moment happens in Prisoner of Azkaban. Sirius Black, imprisoned in Azkaban, suddenly finds out that Peter Pettigrew is alive. Nothing unusual about that until you consider how he learns it. Cornelius Fudge, the Minister of Magic, visits Azkaban and brings a copy of the Daily Prophet. In it is an article about the Weasley family's trip to Egypt. And in the photo, Ron's pet rat, Scabbers, whom Sirius immediately recognizes as Pettigrew. A miracle? A coincidence? Plot convenience? All of the above. The Weasleys win money, go to Egypt, take a photo, it gets published. Fudge picks that exact issue and brings it specifically to the one inmate whose entire life hinges on that image. Number 3. Choosing Peter Pettigrew as secret keeper. One of the strangest decisions in the entire saga is the selection of the Potter's secret keeper. With Lily and James's lives at stake, logic would suggest choosing someone absolutely trustworthy, like Albus Dumbledore, or even using mutual concealment magic, as done later in Deathly Hallows. But no, they pick Peter Pettigrew, timid, easily intimidated, and clearly lacking the strength to resist the Dark Lord. Yes, Sirius claims it was meant to fool Voldemort, but it all ends in disaster. What's worse, everyone in the Order knew there might be a traitor, and yet they entrust their friends' lives to the weakest link. A choice too risky, too convenient for Voldemort, and too necessary for the saga to begin. Number 4. Severus Snape overhears the prophecy. Everything in the Harry Potter saga begins with Sybil Trelawney's prophecy. If Voldemort had never heard it, he wouldn't have hunted babies, and nothing would have happened. So what does fate do? Snape just so happens to be in the Hog's Head and overhears half the prophecy. Why was he eavesdropping on an interview for a divination position? A field widely considered dubious. Why that day, that moment, that one sentence, the only true prophecy Trelawney ever gave, according to Dumbledore? Snape had no reason to believe this meeting would matter. And yet, as if by magic, he was there, and history was changed. Number 5. No students die in Chamber of Secrets. In Chamber of Secrets, Hogwarts students are attacked by a monster, the Basilisk, whose gaze is instantly lethal. But miraculously, no one dies, not a single student. Every victim sees the serpent through a mirror, water reflection, camera lens, or through the ghostly form of nearly headless Nick. What's especially odd is that over an entire academic year, the Basilisk never encounters a student looking it directly in the eyes. Ginny Weasley, under the diary's influence, walks away almost unscathed. No trauma, no punishment, no social fallout. Of course, this is partly due to the book's target audience, but logically, it's an awful lot of luck for a school secretly housing a giant death snake. Number 6. All the time-turners are conveniently destroyed. In Prisoner of Azkaban, we're introduced to an incredible magical device, the time-turner. It lets Hermione attend multiple classes at once, and later helps her and Harry save Sirius. Sound dangerous? That's why time-turners disappear from future books. How? Easy. In Order of the Phoenix. During the battle in the Department of Mysteries, all time-turners are destroyed. Yes, all of them, at once. The Ministry apparently stored every single one in a single room, and no one else had a backup. Plot-wise, this simplifies everything. Time travel would have made the story far messier, but it comes off as a glaringly convenient cleanup, and a deeply questionable move on the Ministry's part. Number 7, Voldemort's wand refuses to obey him in the final duel. Voldemort raised the Elder Wand and cast the final curse. Avada Kedavra! Green light blazed, but it rebounded, seized and killed him instead. The wand refused to obey. Harry stood, alive, untouched. The explanation came later. The wand chooses the wizard, Ollivander had said long ago, and this wand had chosen Harry, not because he won it in battle, but because he disarmed Draco Malfoy weeks earlier, at a different house, in a moment that felt small. Draco had taken the wand from Dumbledore's hand. Then Harry took it from Draco. That simple chain of possession made him the master of the Elder Wand. But no one saw it happen. Not Voldemort, not even Draco. A tiny event decided the fate of the entire war. If Voldemort had used any other wand, or if Harry hadn't taken Draco's, everything would be different. The final twist didn't come through strength or wisdom. It came through technicality. A clever one, but also a deeply convenient one. Number 8. Harry uses Sectumsempra at just the right time. The bathroom duel was fast and vicious. Draco raised his wand, face twisted in fear and fury. Crucio! He shouted, the curse barely forming. Harry, panicked, reacted without thinking. Sectumsempra! The spell sliced through the air. Blood exploded across the tiles. Malfoy collapsed, screaming, and Harry stood frozen, not even knowing what he'd just done. The spell, dark, dangerous, written in the margins by the Half-Blood Prince, had saved him, just in time. But how did it happen so perfectly? Harry had seen the spell before. He didn't know what it did, and yet he chose it, at the exact moment when his life was at risk. It wasn't a disarming charm, or a shield, or a warning shot. It was a deadly curse, one he had never practiced, and somehow it worked, better than expected, almost like the story needed it. A boy guessing blindly in fear and guessing right. Well, that's not strategy. That's luck wrapped in plot. Number 9. Neville randomly finds the perfect underwater solution. Time was running out. The second task of the Triwizard Tournament loomed over Harry like a rising tide. He had no plan, no spell, no idea how to breathe underwater for an hour. Even Hermione, the one with all the answers, was stumped. Then came Neville Longbottom. Shy, awkward Neville, who suddenly remembered a magical plant called gillyweed. It helps you breathe underwater, he said, as if this were common knowledge. Just like that, Harry had a solution. He swallowed the gillyweed, dove into the lake and grew gills. Perfect timing. But why Neville? Why now? Until that moment his herbology skills had never seemed particularly useful. Professor Sprout hadn't suggested anything. Hermione, the brightest witch of her age, somehow missed it. Yet Neville, the boy who once melted his own cauldron, just happened to know exactly what Harry needed. It worked, yes, but it felt less like preparation and more like a plot correction. One line from a side character, and Harry's biggest obstacle vanished beneath a cloud of convenience. Number 10, the flying Ford Anglia shows up in the forest at the perfect moment. The spiders closed in. Fangs clicked in the dark. Harry and Ron backed away, slipping on roots, breath sharp with fear. Aragog had given them a head start. "I won't eat friends of Hagrid," he said. but his children had no such code. The boys ran, but the forest ran with them. And then through the branches came a roar, headlights, screeching tires. The enchanted Ford Anglia crashed through the undergrowth like a wild animal, metal dented, doors swinging. It slammed into the spiders, flinging them aside. Harry dove in, Ron screamed. The car saved them. The last time they had seen the Anglia, it had vanished into the forbidden forest after crashing into the whomping willow. That was months ago. They never spoke of it again. But now, when they were seconds from death, it returned. It looked as though it had been living wild in the forest for some time, Rowling writes, and somehow it arrived just in time. Not a minute too soon, not a second too late. But how did it know? Did it sense them? Was it waiting? The car had never shown loyalty. It had thrown them out, sped into the trees, and disappeared. It had no mind, or so we thought. But this moment reframed it all. The Anglia became a last-minute hero, a machine with instincts. The rescue was thrilling, but it was also far too convenient. A metal saviour sleeping in the trees, waking just when the plot called for it. Number 11. The trio stumbles upon Xenophilius Lovegood just in time. The snow hadn't melted yet when Harry, Ron, and Hermione arrived at the crooked house of Xenophilius Lovegood. They were lost, exhausted, and desperate for answers. They didn't know what the Deathly Hallows were, only that Dumbledore had left clues wrapped in riddles. And then, as if by chance, they landed at the one place in all of Britain where someone could explain it. "The symbol?" Xenophilius said, pointing to the triangle with the circle and the line. "That, my dear, is the sign of the Deathly Hallows." The story unfolded in minutes. The Elder Wand, the Resurrection Stone, the Invisibility Cloak. It was too perfect. They weren't following a trail. They had no map. For weeks they had been apparating across the countryside, avoiding patrols and eating mushrooms. But suddenly they were at the doorstep of the man who had not only heard of the Hallows but believed in them. The timing couldn't have been better, or more convenient. If they had gone anywhere else, if Xenophilius had been away, or less talkative, the Hallows would have remained a myth. But no, he gave them the legend and the symbol and the pieces of the puzzle, all in one visit. It was the turning point of the book. Dumbledore's silence was finally cracked. Harry's path became clear, but even in a world full of magic, this meeting felt unnatural, not earned, but gifted. The trio didn't discover the Hallows through research or deduction. They simply knocked on the right door, a door that waited for them at the exact right moment, almost like the Hallows themselves wanted to be found, or the plot demanded they be. Number 12. Nagini doesn't attack Harry and Hermione immediately. The house in Godric's Hollow was silent. Snow fell on broken gravestones. Harry followed the woman inside, trusting her because she didn't speak. That should have been a warning, but Hilda Bagshot, the famous historian, stood hunched and strange. Her silence stretched on, but Harry pressed forward, pulled by the hope of answers. Hermione whispered doubts. "She doesn't seem right," she had said, but Harry wasn't listening. Grief clouded everything. Then came the voice. Soft, slithering, wrong. In the darkness, Nagini revealed herself, breaking free from Batilda's corpse like a monstrous parasite. But the question remains, why wait? Why draw Harry upstairs, isolate him, and only then attack? Voldemort's orders were clear. Kill the boy. And yet Nagini hesitated. The snake had the upper hand. One strike downstairs would have ended everything. But the trap was theatrical, drawn out, convenient. It gave Hermione time. She crashed into the room as Harry struggled. Her curse shattered Nagini's hold. "Diffindo!" she cried, breaking the wandless silence. The moment became an escape. Barely. They disapparated in panic, bloodied and broken, but the scene felt staged, like the story needed them to survive, like danger was allowed in just long enough to thrill but not enough to end. It was not the cold efficiency one would expect from Voldemort's closest companion. Nagini wasn't just a snake. She was a horcrux, deadly, loyal, strategic. So why the delay? Why the performance? The books offer no spell, no charm, no reason why she couldn't strike sooner, unless the real answer is off the page, unless it was the hand of the author, not the serpent, that waited in the shadows, letting Harry live one more time. Number 13, Voldemort entrusts horcruxes to unreliable places and people. Voldemort trusted no one, but he trusted too easily when it came to his horcruxes. He split his soul to achieve immortality, yet hid the pieces with a strange mix of arrogance and carelessness. The locket was left in a cave protected by only one Inferius-filled lake and a potion. He would have been sure only he could find it, Dumbledore said. But the enchantments were surprisingly basic. Regulus Black and Creature breached them with relative ease. Later, Harry and Dumbledore did the same. The Hufflepuff cup was guarded by Bellatrix Lestrange, hardly the image of subtlety or strategic thinking. She locked it inside her vault at Gringotts, a place famous for its security. But Voldemort should have known better than to rely on goblin-run banks. Hermione, disguised as Bellatrix, walked right in. The enchantments were nasty, yes, the multiplying treasure, the burning hot objects, but all of it could be beaten. They escaped on a dragon, of all things. That alone should have told Voldemort his planning had holes. Then there was the lost diadem of Ravenclaw, a priceless magical artifact hidden in a castle, crawling with students. Voldemort stashed it in the Room of Requirement, the same room used by Dumbledore's army for secret meetings. Did he think no one would ever find it? Or did he just not care? He believed no one else could ever discover it, Harry realized. That belief cost him. The room was accessible to any student who needed it. In the end, it was destroyed by Vincent Crabbe, by accident. A man who feared death more than anything treated his soul like a scavenger hunt. No unbreakable curses, no extra-dimensional vaults, no decoys, just ego and theatrics. He was smart, yes, but not wise. Voldemort underestimated love, underestimated loyalty, and worst of all, underestimated Harry Potter. His horcruxes didn't fail him. His pride did. Number 14. Fawkes, the Phoenix appears exactly when needed. In the damp, ancient silence of the Chamber of Secrets, death hissed through the air. Harry Potter, 12 years old and barely able to keep his legs from shaking, stood alone before the immense basilisk, its fangs glistening with venom, potent enough to kill in moments. Tom Riddle, the preserved shade of Lord Voldemort, watched with the cold amusement of a predator. This was the endgame, and all signs pointed toward Harry's defeat. He had no weapon, no allies, and the walls of the chamber loomed around him like the jaws of a tomb. And then, without warning, without logic, Fawkes, the Phoenix of Albus Dumbledore, burst into the chamber in a blaze of golden light, changing the course of the battle with such precision it bordered on divine intervention. The bird, radiant and composed, was not only able to blind the basilisk by clawing at its eyes, rendering the deadly gaze harmless, but also brought with it the legendary sword of Godric Gryffindor. That sword, forged centuries ago by one of Hogwarts' founders and imbued with ancient magic, had the uncanny ability to appear to a true Gryffindor in need. Yet it was not Harry who summoned it, it was Fawkes, whose talons dropped the weapon precisely when it was needed, as though the creature not only sensed danger, but understood the precise tools required to defeat it. The moment was theatrical in its perfection, orchestrated like the climax of an epic designed more for the audience's catharsis than the natural rhythm of a lived world. J.K. Rowling offers the explanation that Fawkes came to Harry because he showed loyalty to Dumbledore. Loyalty in the magical rules of this universe is enough to summon a phoenix. But this simple reasoning collapses under scrutiny when one considers the complex logistics of what followed. Not only did Fawkes arrive, he arrived at the exact second when death seemed inevitable. He brought not just healing tears, which miraculously cure basilisk venom, one of the most lethal substances in the wizarding world, but also the precise weapon required to kill the beast. The series of events does not feel like the result of magical laws, but rather like the pen of an author unwilling to let her hero fail. The sword itself, another element drenched in narrative convenience, was described by Dumbledore as appearing only to a true Gryffindor. But what determines a true Gryffindor? Courage, loyalty, need. If that were the case, any student could theoretically summon the weapon in a time of crisis. But the sword does not reside in a cupboard or a vault. It appears inside the sorting hat, which also just happens to be available because Fawkes brings it along. Thus, the Phoenix does not only respond emotionally, but also acts with the foresight of a seasoned strategist, delivering every component required for Harry's survival, as if following a divine checklist. This moment in the Chamber of Secrets has often been celebrated as magical and heroic, and it is on the surface, but beneath that glow it begins to fracture under logical examination. Consider the following. How did Fawkes know that Harry needed the sorting hat? The hat, after all, is not typically carried by Dumbledore's Phoenix. It resides in the headmaster's office and serves no defensive purpose. The only reason to bring it would be if Fawkes knew it contained the sword. But magical creatures, however intelligent, are not omniscient. Unless we are to believe that Fawkes had a prophetic understanding of what lay ahead, the arrival of both hat and sword points to something more, an author reaching for narrative salvation. Even the method of the sword's delivery defies natural magical logic. The hat is dropped, Harry pulls it onto his head, and from within its folds the silver gleam of Godric Gryffindor's blade emerges. The scene evokes images of Arthur pulling Excalibur from the stone, an archetype deeply embedded in Western storytelling. Yet there is no prior suggestion that the hat holds such power. The sudden appearance of the sword is not foreshadowed. It is not earned by trial or ritual. It simply appears clean and shining because the plot requires it. Furthermore, Fawkes's tears, capable of healing Harry after he has been poisoned by the basilisk, are presented without restriction. They function as a deus ex machina, erasing the consequences of a fatal bite. In a universe where Polyjuice Potion takes a month to brew, and where magical healing often comes with limits, the Phoenix tears stand out as an anomaly. Their timing, again, is perfect. The poison surges through Harry's veins, his vision fades, and in the moment before he is lost, Fawkes weeps upon the wound. The cure is instantaneous and complete. Not only does this eliminate risk, but it also erases the tension that the narrative had spent pages building. It is worth recalling how Riddle reacts to the Phoenix's arrival. His confidence wavers, his posture shifts. The boy ghost, so sure of his victory, is now aware that something unpredictable has entered the fray. "That's a Phoenix," he says, with wary disgust. But the presence of Fawkes not only alarms him, it undermines the logic of the confrontation. Riddle, having orchestrated the return of the basilisk, is undone not by cleverness or courage, but by a series of coincidental magical gifts that arrive on Harry's behalf. This cascade of conveniences raises the question, was Harry truly the architect of his own victory or simply the recipient of magical charity? He does not discover a secret spell. He does not trick the basilisk. He does not even earn the weapon by any act beyond pulling it from a hat brought to him by another. The resolution of the battle depends almost entirely on external forces stepping in to deliver victory into his hands. The reader is meant to believe this is an affirmation of character, but it feels more like a rescue operation staged by the author to prevent a beloved protagonist from dying too soon. Number 15. Harry resurrects after Avada Kedavra. The Forbidden Forest was cold, damp, and whispering with secrets when Harry Potter faced death for the second time in his short life. The trees stood like silent witnesses, ancient and unmoved by the events to come. Lord Voldemort, surrounded by his loyal Death Eaters, pointed his wand at the boy who lived. He pronounced the killing curse, Avada Kedavra, and a flash of green light split the night once more. It was the same spell that had failed to kill Harry as a baby, and yet here it was again, repeating history. This time the boy fell. This time the forest went silent. This time Voldemort thought he had finally won. But of course that wasn't the end. It was never going to be the end, because this story needed Harry alive. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, J.K. Rowling constructs a narrative web of magic, sacrifice and prophecy that culminates in Harry's death and miraculous return. According to the book, Voldemort's killing curse only destroyed the piece of his own soul inside Harry, not Harry himself. Additionally, Lily Potter's sacrificial protection, reawakened by Harry's choice to walk into death willingly, shielded everyone from Voldemort's spells once more. Furthermore, Harry had become the master of death by uniting the three Deathly Hallows. Each of these elements alone is intricate and mystical, but together they form a coincidence so precise that it begins to feel suspiciously convenient. Voldemort, despite being considered one of the most powerful dark wizards in history, remains bafflingly ignorant about the very magic he manipulates. He once dismissed love as a weakness, a mere sentiment rather than an ancient force. And now he fails to understand wand lore, the power of sacrifice and the danger of horcruxes. That he would again use the very spell that failed him before, a spell driven by will and lethal intent, without questioning its effectiveness, suggests either supreme arrogance or plot-serving negligence. The same Avada Kedavra that rebounded off an infant now ricochets metaphorically, killing only what Voldemort never intended to protect, his own cursed soul fragment. Dumbledore meets Harry in a spectral version of King's Cross Station and provides a spiritual explanation that feels more philosophical than magical. "You were the seventh Horcrux, Harry, the Horcrux he never meant to make," Dumbledore tells him. The audience is led to believe that Harry's soul remained intact because Voldemort's curse couldn't destroy what it wasn't aimed at. But this logic is murky. Why wouldn't the killing curse, designed to end life instantly and irrevocably, affect Harry's own soul? Why did only Voldemort's fragment suffer? It's never been established that the killing curse can pick and choose. Rowling also adds the element of the Elder Wand, the most powerful wand in existence, which Harry had unknowingly won allegiance from. This wand, in Voldemort's hands, refused to harm its true master. That might explain the ineffectiveness of the spell, but again, it leans on an extraordinary chain of events. Draco Malfoy disarmed Dumbledore, making him the wand's master. Then Harry disarmed Draco. Voldemort, ignorant of this chain, took the wand from Dumbledore's tomb, believing its loyalty lay with him. This obscure twist of magical jurisprudence saves Harry's life without anyone realizing it until much later. One can't help but wonder how many rules needed to stack in Harry's favor before the outcome stopped being believable. It's important to remember that the narrative requires Harry to die and return. His martyrdom is symbolic, a messianic arc that echoes tales older than the wizarding world itself. Harry sacrifices himself for others, descends into death, and returns transformed. Yet mythic as it is, the resurrection leans on constructs introduced late in the series, the Deathly Hallows, wand allegiance, and the dual-souled nature of Harry's being. These narrative tools had not been sufficiently grounded beforehand. The Resurrection Stone, for instance, only appears in the final book, tucked into a golden snitch. It exists because it must, it works because it must, and it vanishes conveniently when its job is done. In the Deathly Hallows, the moment of Harry's return is dramatic but never fully explained with the rigor that defined earlier magical mechanics. The spell Avada Kedavra is supposed to be unblockable and irreversible, and yet twice it has failed against this boy. The reader is told it's because of love, because of horcruxes, because of wands, but these justifications read more like poetic symbolism than consistent magical theory. The narrative demands that Harry survives, and so it bends rules and invents loopholes to make that happen. One starts to suspect that the magic is serving the plot rather than the plot emerging from the magic. This issue is compounded by the fact that Voldemort is repeating history without learning from it. The man who once saw his soul split into 7 for immortality now uses the same spell in the same way, expecting a different result. His obsession with power blinds him to deeper understanding, which is thematically appropriate, but also makes him an oddly ineffective villain. In this moment, Voldemort is not terrifying, he's foolish. He plays the part that the story needs, the powerful, ignorant tyrant who stumbles at the finish line. It's dramatic, yes, but is it earned? When Harry wakes in the forest, lying still beneath Hagrid's tearful eyes, he is alive not by chance, but by narrative necessity. Voldemort orders Narcissa Malfoy to check if the boy lives, and she lies, again, by pure coincidence, because she wants to know her own son's fate. Had it been Bellatrix, or any other Death Eater, the lie might not have happened. But it had to be Narcissa. It always had to be Narcissa. The plot curves around Harry like a shield. Events conspire to protect him not because he casts powerful spells or outwits his enemy, but because the story won't end without him. Number 16, Hermione's bottomless bag has everything they need. Of all the magical conveniences in the final chapters of the Harry Potter saga, none feels more conspicuously engineered than Hermione Granger's enchanted handbag. As the trio embarks on their dangerous, uncertain journey in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, this tiny beaded bag proves to be a trove of miraculous preparedness. From a fully equipped tent with separate bedrooms to spare clothes, books, healing potions, and even a portrait crucial to the plot, the bag seems to yield precisely what the characters need, exactly when they need it. And, while Hermione is undoubtedly the most diligent and far-sighted witch of her age, the narrative convenience of her bag cannot go unnoticed. J.K. Rowling introduces the bag with a swift touch of charm. Undetectable extension charm, Hermione explains, as she pulls a complete camping tent out of a pouch no bigger than a coin purse. This is the same spell that bewitched the Weasleys' car boot during the Quidditch World Cup. The audience is expected to accept the enchantment as standard magic. But what makes Hermione's bag stretch beyond believability is not its size, but its uncanny perfection as a plot device. It contains everything the heroes need to survive, no matter the turn their adventure takes. The first time the bag demonstrates its critical utility is almost immediate. As soon as the trio flees Bill and Fleur's wedding, they find themselves in the middle of London, pursued by Death Eaters. Out of the blue, Hermione produces a change of clothes, first aid supplies and disillusionment charms to help them escape detection. Then, as if preordained, she pulls out a fully functional tent complete with beds, bathroom and kitchen. "I've had it packed for days," she claims. But even with days of preparation, it stretches belief that she would pack every possible necessity without ever knowing the journey's destination. One of the most striking examples of the bag's narrative convenience appears during the forest sequences. When Ron abandons the group, Harry and Hermione wander through the wilderness, burdened with grief and fear. Amid their emotional collapse, Hermione is still able to draw out warm blankets, nutritious food, and even a book on ancient magical symbols, specifically the Tales of Beedle the Bard. The inclusion of that book passed down from Dumbledore ends up revealing the symbol of the Deathly Hallows. The timing is impeccable, as if the story demands a clue, and the bag delivers it with a gentle rustle of pages. A particularly curious moment arrives when Hermione reveals she's carrying not just books and clothes, but the portrait of Phineas Nigellus Black. The portrait becomes a vital link between the trio and the goings-on at Hogwarts. Phineas, ever disdainful, provides intelligence that leads to the discovery of the sword of Gryffindor's location. But one must wonder, why did Hermione think to bring a portrait in the first place? In a bag supposedly packed in anticipation of a quick getaway, the inclusion of a centuries-old painting from Dumbledore's office feels suspiciously like authorial foresight disguised as Hermione's diligence. Even more peculiar is the moment she pulls out Polyjuice Potion. This complex, time-consuming brew had to be prepared well in advance, and yet, somehow, Hermione has multiple vials ready. She uses it to infiltrate the Ministry of Magic, impersonating Mafalda Hopkirk. "I made it months ago," she says. But when, exactly, did she anticipate needing it for a ministry break-in? The logical answer is never. The real answer is that the plot required it and the bag obliged. The bag also contains a supply of essence of dittany, which Hermione uses on Ron after he is splinched during their escape from the ministry. The injury is serious, and without the potion he might have died. Once again, Hermione just happens to have the precise magical remedy on hand. "Essence of dittany," she says calmly, as though it's perfectly normal to carry a rare potion meant to heal deep wounds on a spontaneous camping trip. It reinforces the image of Hermione not just as prepared, but nearly omniscient. Then comes the tent. Not once, but several times the trio sets up camp in hostile environments, freezing woods, stormy fields, riverbanks, and yet the tent never fails to provide warmth, shelter, and comfort. This same tent was used during the Quidditch World Cup, complete with bunk beds and a kitchenette. It's the perfect hideout, invisible to Muggle eyes and concealed with protective charms. But its presence in the bag, packed just in case, strains the limits of even Hermione's famous foresight. The bag even contains a radio. Not just any radio, but one enchanted to pick up Potterwatch, the underground broadcast that shares updates from the Wizarding Resistance. Hermione conveniently tunes in just as the group begins to lose hope, and the broadcast revives their spirits. "Keep each other safe," says the familiar voice of Lee Jordan. The message comes at a moment of crisis, restoring morale. One could argue that the broadcast is a coincidence, but the fact that Hermione just happens to carry a magically modified radio suitable for rebel transmissions suggests otherwise. When Harry breaks into Bathilda Bagshot's house in Godric's Hollow, Hermione is able to produce enchanted ropes, cleaning spells, and even a bag of dragon dung used for various potion ingredients. The diversity of items within the bag becomes absurdly broad, and while it reinforces the depth of Hermione's magical talent, it begins to feel like the bag is less a tool and more a narrative crutch, rescuing the trio from every possible scenario. Later, during the Gringotts heist, Hermione uses Polyjuice Potion again to become Bellatrix Lestrange. She pulls out Bellatrix's wand, a set of robes and shoes, all of it conveniently stored in the bag. It begs the question, how did she come into possession of Bellatrix's personal wardrobe and wand? The answer lies in Malfoy Manor, where they had captured her. But again, the act of preserving these exact items in a moment of chaos only makes sense in hindsight, after the plot reveals their importance. Number 17. The full body bind curse always works without fail. Under the flickering light of torches and the thick silence of Hogwarts' long corridors, Hermione Granger whispered the spell that would become a peculiar kind of legend in the series, Petrificus Totalis. With a snap precision and without hesitation, Neville Longbottom fell to the floor, stiff as a board, eyes wide and helpless. It was the first time this incantation appeared in the story, and it would not be the last. What made it so striking was not merely its effectiveness, but how consistently it worked without fail, regardless of the situation or target. From the early days of first-year uncertainty to the chaos of wartime resistance, this particular spell would stand as a quiet miracle, uttered, triggered, and always obeyed. The effectiveness of Petrificus Totalis lies not only in its result, but in the sheer absence of resistance to it. Magic in the Harry Potter universe is richly detailed, filled with nuance, shields, counters, and strategies. Spells like Expelliarmus are blocked, dodged, and sometimes fail entirely. Protections like Protego, magical barriers and enchanted artifacts often disrupt even the most powerful curses, yet this one body-binding charm taught to 11-year-olds seems immune to the normal complications of magical combat. Its reliability borders on the miraculous, and as such it raises unsettling questions about whether this spell's real power is in its design or in its narrative convenience. One of the most telling moments of the spell's strange supremacy occurs in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. Hermione uses Petrificus Totalis on Neville to stop him from preventing the trio's midnight departure. Neville, though not a trained duelist, is a full human being with a wand and awareness. Still no shield arises, no last-minute dodge, just instant paralysis. Rowling writes, Hermione pointed her wand straight at Neville. "Petrificus Totalis," she cried, and Neville's arms snapped to his sides. His legs sprang together, his whole body seized stiffly, and he fell flat on his face, stiff as a board. This isn't a matter of strategic mastery, it's an instant, unquestioned victory. As the series progresses, the spell doesn't fade into the background. It continues to be a handy narrative tool, deployed in situations that require quick, neat solutions. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Draco Malfoy uses it on Harry aboard the Hogwarts Express. Despite Harry's increasing magical skills and instincts, the attack lands perfectly. Rowling tells us Malfoy had stepped over Harry, who was struggling to get up, and pointed his wand straight at Harry's face. "Petrificus Totalis!" Harry's arms and legs snapped together, and he fell backward onto the floor of the compartment. The same unerring effect, the same sudden loss of agency. It's not just that the spell works, it's that it always works when it is most needed to serve the story. It arrives like a stagehand, yanking a character from the spotlight just before they can disrupt the intended flow. The victim never counters it, never shrugs it off, never blocks it. Even seasoned wizards are felled by it without the courtesy of resistance. It rarely, if ever, appears in a duel where stakes are evenly matched. Rather, it is saved for sneak attacks, ambushes, or moments of high dramatic need. This suggests less about the spell's design and more about the invisible hand of storytelling tilting the rules. The disparity becomes more troubling when you consider other spells in the magical arsenal. Even Stupefy, the stunning spell, is known to fail or require repeated casting. In the Order of the Phoenix, during the battle in the Department of Mysteries, wizards dodge, counter, and shield themselves against Stupefy. Even Avada Kedavra, the killing curse, has been evaded. Sirius Black dies by falling through a mysterious veil, not by a clean killing curse. There is a whole dance of magical resistance, except with Petrificus Totalis. It glides through this ballet untouched, bypassing logic. A key scene that highlights this odd imbalance is in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, when the trio infiltrates the Ministry using Polyjuice potion. During the escape, chaos erupts. Stunning spells fly, elevators crash, papers swirl like snow. Yet again, Petrificus Totalis is used on Yaxley, and the result is immediate compliance. No counterspell, no duel, just paralysis. One cannot help but notice that whenever the spell is spoken, the victim is instantly removed from the plot's chessboard, as if frozen for later use or simply discarded. Why does this matter? Because the reliability of magic in the Potterverse is often tied to intent, skill, emotion, and context. Harry's patronus evolves as he gains confidence. Occlumency fails when emotional control lapses. Even simple spells like Lumos can flicker under stress. But Petrificus Totalis remains oddly impervious to context. Its application is never emotional, never messy. It's not even dramatic, just surgical. That removes a layer of human error, the unpredictable rawness that makes magic so enchanting. Consider the Hogwarts professors. Characters like McGonagall or Snape are shown to wield magic with terrifying efficiency. They duel, disarm, and disable. Yet even in these elite circles, their spells require nuance and response. Snape blocks Harry's attacks without words. McGonagall conjures elements and changes matter itself, but no one seems to have a shield ready for Petrificus Totalis, even though it's taught in first-year defense against the dark arts. This lack of preparedness feels less like oversight and more like a plot accommodation. In real magical combat, as Rowling portrays it, the rule is tension. The duel between Harry and Voldemort in the graveyard of Goblet of Fire is riddled with reversals, missed curses, and the strange echo of priori incantatem. The hallway duels in Order of the Phoenix feature collapsing walls, ricocheting spells, and a clear sense that even seasoned duelists cannot guarantee a hit. Yet Petrificus Totalis exists outside this dance. It behaves like a key that unlocks every door with equal ease, a wand's version of an off switch. It is also striking that this spell seems to have no enduring counters. In many cases, other spells can be undone with simple counter-charms or through magical resilience, but characters struck by Petrificus Totalis remain immobilized until someone else intervenes. This again reinforces the narrative dependence. It ensures the victim is conveniently removed from the action until a later beat. The spell not only disables bodies, but silences voices, halts decisions, pauses consequences. It is, in short, narrative sedation. And yet there is no real discussion of the spell within the magical community of the books, no warnings about its overuse, no strategies offered in defense classes, no mention of magical shielding against it. The spell exists in a vacuum, immune to commentary, regulation, or critique. It is a ghost in the curriculum, always available, always effective, and never questioned. This invisibility deepens the suspicion that Petrificus Totalis is less a piece of magical lore and more a loophole the story keeps open for emergencies. From a structural standpoint, this is not inherently wrong. Stories require devices. They lean on tropes, repeat motifs, and conjure shortcuts to keep pace. But in a world so meticulously built, where wand movement matters, where magical lore is codified, where every object has a traceable enchantment, the unchecked power of one simple charm feels like a quiet betrayal. It is the magical equivalent of pressing pause on a scene and hoping the audience doesn't notice the remote in the writer's hand. Even in the room of requirement, a place that adapts to need and threat, Petrificus Totalis is employed with robotic perfection. In Deathly Hallows, during the Battle of Hogwarts, chaos unfolds in every hallway. Spells rebound, curses shriek. Yet again the charm is invoked, and again it triumphs. It lands like gravity, certain, unthinking, and absolute. There's no tension when it appears. The reader knows the outcome. That undermines stakes. When every spell is a gamble, but this one is a guarantee, the illusion of danger diminishes. Harry himself rarely uses the spell, preferring defensive or stunning magic. But when he does, as in Chamber of Secrets, it still functions like a wand-flip solution. During their encounter with the Basilisk and Tom Riddle's spectral form, Harry must navigate a world of chaos and ancient evil. The idea that a first-year spell would do anything in such a place seems absurd, and indeed, he doesn't rely on it there. This only sharpens the inconsistency. Why does it work so well in other dangerous moments but vanish when the narrative wants more drama? Some might argue that its success lies in surprise. The spell only works because the victim is unprepared, but that doesn't hold up. In many cases, like Draco ambushing Harry or Yaxley facing off during a battle, the target is alert and armed. Yet no matter the awareness, the spell lands. It skips past reflex, it shatters momentum, it replaces the tension of magical unpredictability with narrative convenience. In a world so dependent on character agency, it neutralizes choice. Even the unforgivable curses require emotional investment. Imperio demands control, Crucio requires sadism, and Avada Kedavra demands hate. Petrificus Totalis demands nothing. It is empty of feeling, empty of story. That emptiness makes it dangerous not to characters, but to the story's integrity. Magic should reflect character and risk. When a spell is too clean, too easy, it starts to feel less like spellcraft and more like script writing. What makes this more frustrating is that Rowling clearly understands magical logic. She creates rules, apparition requires licensing, portkeys need permission. The trace exists for underage wizards. Time turners are tightly regulated. All of these mechanisms exist to prevent narrative abuse. Yet, Petrificus Totalis remains untethered, a floating clause in the magical contract. It is both beginner's tool and plot's hammer, wielded without scrutiny. And so it remains a mystery. Not how the spell works, but why it always works. Not why characters use it, but why they never resist it. It is the unspoken glitch in a system otherwise obsessed with balance. Its very consistency makes it suspicious. Its silence makes it loud. In a story where wands choose wizards, where love outshines death, and where every choice matters, Petrificus Totalis stands as an exception. A button pressed by the author, rather than a spell cast by a character. That is not magic. That is a script. Number 18, Fred and George invent anti-Death Eater tools before the war. Fred and George Weasley had always been underestimated. At Hogwarts, they were seen as class clowns, pranksters who barely took anything seriously. But when they opened Weasley's Wizard Wheezes in Diagon Alley during the summer before Harry's 6th year, something changed. At first glance, the shop was a spectacle of colours, noises and mayhem, skiving snack boxes, extendable ears, canary creams. Yet behind the glitter of novelty and laughter, they were building something else entirely. Long before the Ministry would acknowledge Voldemort's return, the twins began manufacturing products that would prove indispensable in the darkest days of the Wizarding War. Fred and George's creation of shield hats and protective cloaks seemed, at the time, to be nothing more than a cheeky way to get back at Dolores Umbridge and other overreaching Ministry figures, but those items soon turned into essential tools of magical defense. Their shield cloaks, sold under the shield charm line, repelled hexes, jinxes, and minor curses. Hermione Granger, ever the practical mind, was impressed by the complexity of their enchantments. She once remarked, "They're actually quite advanced, you know. I don't think even the Ministry is making anything like this." These weren't just toys, these were weapons disguised as jokes. As the Ministry began denying the return of Voldemort, Fred and George began preparing for a war. Whether consciously or not, their store evolved from a den of pranks into a fortress of innovation. Their decoy detonators, small black orbs that ran away and exploded with a bang, became the perfect distraction devices. Harry used one during their infiltration of the Ministry in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, allowing him to slip away unnoticed. How could two teenagers without official access to war intelligence or prophecy design such tools months before anyone else saw the writing on the wall? When Dumbledore's army was formed, the Weasley twins were its most vocal supporters. Not only did they mock Umbridge openly, but they actively distributed materials that helped their fellow students subvert her rule. They knew what she represented, not just authoritarianism, but weakness in the face of true danger. As Fred and George flew away from Hogwarts in a blaze of fireworks and defiance, they symbolically transferred the battlefront from the school corridors to the outside world. And there, in the heart of Diagon Alley, they laid the foundations for resistance. It was not just the ingenuity of their products that raised eyebrows, but the timing. Their shield hats went on sale in Order of the Phoenix, right as Umbridge began her rise to power, but long before the general public admitted the world was falling into chaos. Their Peruvian instant darkness powder, sold discreetly under the counter, allowed for quick escapes and confusion during raids. The fact that these products predated Voldemort's overt return suggests either a near supernatural intuition or a storytelling convenience that borders on implausible. Fred and George, for all their laughter, were not blind. They had witnessed the First Wizarding War as children. Their uncles Gideon and Fabian Prewett were murdered by Death Eaters. Their mother, Molly, still cried when speaking of her brothers. Perhaps the trauma of loss, buried beneath layers of humor and rebellion, shaped their understanding of war better than any aura training could. Perhaps without realizing it, they were building a defense mechanism, not just for themselves, but for everyone else who would one day find themselves outnumbered and outgunned. Still, there's something eerie about how conveniently prepared they were. While the Ministry issued leaflets and failed to act, the Weasley twins produced counter-imperious kits and sneakoscopes with enhanced sensitivity. According to Half-Blood Prince, the Ministry eventually began bulk ordering shield hats, a move that infuriated Fred, who scoffed, "They don't even know how they work." It was ironic. The twins, barely out of school, had created what the Ministry's top department couldn't manage in time. How could they have known what to create before the danger fully emerged? Their shop, once a hub of juvenile chaos, became a stronghold during the height of Voldemort's regime. It offered sanctuary, intelligence, and vital supplies. Even as Death Eaters patrolled the streets and Diagon Alley fell into silence, Fred and George's products endured underground. The Order of the Phoenix relied on their inventions. Kingsley Shacklebolt was known to use their shield cloaks during his secret missions. Arthur Weasley discreetly carried a Weasley's sneakoscope in his coat pocket when visiting Muggle protection sites. The twins, without a drop of formal training in defense, had become the unsung engineers of the rebellion. It is tempting to believe that this was pure brilliance, that the twins, through intuition and wit, had simply tapped into the world's need before it knew what it needed. But the narrative timing raises suspicions. Why were they the only ones with the foresight to produce these tools? Why did none of the older, more experienced witches and wizards act with the same urgency? Fred and George's evolution from mischief makers to wartime tacticians feels narratively convenient, almost as if the plot required young, loyal allies to counterbalance the loss of Sirius and the unreliability of the Ministry. The books never explain how exactly Fred and George learned to enchant their items so effectively. Their school records were abysmal. They left Hogwarts without completing their new teas, and yet they managed to design artifacts with enchantments complex enough to rival Department of Mysteries innovations. Their shield hats could repel stunning spells, their portable swamps disrupted entire corridors, their spell-repelling cloaks withstood magical attacks. These were not gags. They were miracles of magical engineering. It's possible that their brilliance was inherited. After all, their father Arthur was fascinated by Muggle machinery and experimental enchantments. Perhaps Fred and George simply inherited a particular kind of genius, one not suited to exams but to chaotic creativity. Still, that doesn't explain the preemptive nature of their designs. The Imperious Curse was not a daily problem at Hogwarts, yet they developed protection against it. In Deathly Hallows, when Harry reflects on Fred and George's arsenal, he recognizes its value. The twins had invented defenses far superior to anything the Ministry could supply. There is a theory, unspoken in the text but haunting in its implications, that the twins had access to information beyond what they should have known. Could they have overheard conversations at Order headquarters? It's plausible. The Burrow was often the meeting point for Order members, or perhaps they developed their tools not from prophecy but from trauma and instinct. The Second Wizarding War mirrored the first in too many ways, and in the shadows of that repetition, Fred and George decided they would not be unarmed this time. Even their joke items were subtly retooled for wartime. Their Tun-Tung toffee, once used for laughs, could incapacitate a foe. Their You-Know-Poo tablets, marketed as crude humor, mimicked magical laxatives that could disarm opponents through distraction. Their love potions were banned in many schools for potential manipulation. It's almost as if every item in their shop had a double purpose, one for mischief and one for war. As if behind every laugh they were preparing for bloodshed. This duality between the pranksters and the protectors is what makes Fred and George's role in the story so curious. Their shift from chaos to conscience was never fully addressed. The books never pause to explain how their shop transformed into a war supply depot. Perhaps J.K. Rowling, intentionally or not, used their business as a way to explain how ordinary young people could rise to extraordinary circumstances. Or perhaps she needed Harry to have allies who weren't professors or auras, but peers, reliable, inventive, and unafraid. Their contributions reached a climax during the Battle of Hogwarts. Though the shop had been attacked and Fred would ultimately lose his life, their inventions lived on. Their products, their legacy, became part of the Resistance's toolkit. Smoke bombs, shield cloaks, decoy detonators, all used in battle. In a way, Fred and George armed Hogwarts more effectively than the Ministry ever did, and they did so without permission, without funding, and without fear. George's survival is perhaps the most painful echo of their foresight. After Fred's death, the shop becomes a living memory. George continues the work not just in honor of his brother, but as a continuation of what they started. Not a joke shop, but a rebel forge. His presence at the rebuilt Diagon Alley is not merely business, it is defiance. Every customer that walks through his door walks into a place where resistance was born. Some fans suggest that Rowling used the twins' shop as a narrative shortcut, that she needed a way to funnel defensive items into Harry's hands without involving the Ministry or Dumbledore, that the shop, whimsical and colourful, was the perfect camouflage for delivering war materials without raising suspicion. It's a valid theory. Fred and George's sudden evolution into wartime inventors feels too convenient, but if that's the case, then their role is even more vital, because it suggests that humour, chaotic, unpredictable humour, is not the enemy of courage, it is its disguise. Fred and George did not ask for this war. They didn't train in dueling clubs or chase glory in battle, but they saw what was coming. Whether by trauma, instinct, or narrative necessity, they prepared for the darkness when no one else did, and in doing so, they turned their laughter into armor, not just for themselves, but for everyone who would one day need to stand and fight. Number 19, Harry casts a full Patronus way too easily. Of all the spells introduced throughout the Harry Potter series, none carries the emotional weight and technical complexity quite like the Patronus charm. Designed to repel Dementors, the chilling, soul-sucking creatures that feed on despair, it is famously difficult, taught only to advanced students, and even then, often attempted with limited success. But when Harry Potter, a traumatized third year at Hogwarts, not only learns to cast it, but conjures a corporeal Patronus in the shape of a stag, the timing feels so narratively convenient that it invites scrutiny. His mastery arrives at precisely the moment it is most needed, during a nightmarish confrontation by the lake, when Sirius Black and himself are moments away from a fate worse than death. The spell bursts from his wand with dazzling force, a fully formed guardian driving back the swarm of Dementors. In that instant, Harry becomes a hero of another level. But the ease with which he achieves it, especially under extreme psychological pressure, raises the question, was it a triumph of magical brilliance, or merely an overly convenient twist to serve the plot? Before the lake incident, Harry had already experienced 2 traumatic run-ins with Dementors. The first, on the Hogwarts Express, leaves him unconscious and reeling. The second, during a Quidditch match, sees him fall from his broomstick mid-air, waking later in the hospital wing with no memory of the event. These moments highlight his vulnerability. Dementors don't simply frighten Harry, they undo him. He alone hears. His mother screams as he loses consciousness, a horror so deeply personal it renders him uniquely affected among his peers. Yet despite this, just a few sessions with Professor Remus Lupin changed the course of his magical capabilities. In the span of several weeks, the boy who could barely stand in the presence of a Dementor becomes a young wizard capable of casting one of the most advanced defensive charms in the magical world. Professor Lupin acknowledges the difficulty of the Patronus charm. He says, it's a very advanced spell, very few wizards can do it. underscoring its exclusivity and the talent required to wield it. It demands focus on a powerful, happy memory, the exact opposite emotional state of what a Dementor induces. The spell requires not just magical power, but emotional clarity, something Harry, burdened with trauma, loss, and the pressures of prophecy, should arguably lack. Yet when asked what memory he uses, Harry initially thinks of his first time riding a broomstick. It doesn't work. Then he tries the moment when he learned he was leaving the Dursleys. Again, no success. Only later does he settle on a memory of being with his parents. Not even a memory, but more a fantasy of what that would have been like. Somehow that imaginary scene is potent enough to conjure a full-bodied Patronus. The moment at the lake remains one of the most dramatic turning points in The Prisoner of Azkaban. Harry and Sirius are surrounded by a horde of Dementors. 100 Dementors were advancing, gliding toward them, sucking the night from the air. He could feel the Dementors' cold starting to get inside him. Then a silvery light grew brighter and brighter. In the chaos, Harry raises his wand and shouts, "Expecto Patronum!" and a magnificent stag erupts from its tip. The Patronus gallops across the ground, antlers lowered, scattering the Dementors like mist in sunlight. Harry believes in that moment he has seen his father cast the spell from across the lake. Only later does he realize it was himself, through the use of the time turner. The event is framed as an act of magical self-reliance, a metaphorical inheritance of his father's strength, but the speed and perfection of the spell's execution beg for a closer look. One cannot help but compare Harry's achievement with the struggles of older, more experienced wizards. In Order of the Phoenix, even members of the advanced level Defense Against the Dark Arts Club, Dumbledore's army, struggle with the Patronus. It is not for lack of trying or talent. Many students can produce wisps of mist, but few generate full-bodied Patronuses. It is presented as a milestone, a moment of triumph. And yet, Harry, younger and arguably more psychologically unstable than many of them, accomplishes it quickly and cleanly in his third year. In contrast, Nymphadora Tonks, an Auror trained by the Ministry of Magic, only changes the form of her Patronus much later, influenced by her love for Remus Lupin. This suggests not only emotional complexity, but also time to grow, time to feel, time to master. The entire structure of The Prisoner of Azkaban leans heavily into the symbolism of the stag. Harry's Patronus takes the same form as his father's animagus transformation, James Potter's illegal yet heroic change into a stag during his school years. Lupin explains, "Your father's animagus form was a stag. That's why he was called Prongs." The revelation is poignant and powerful. It creates a lineage of protection. James protected others as Prongs, and now Harry protects himself and Sirius with the same image. The stag becomes a bridge between generations. It's beautiful, even poetic. But the spell's perfection, the immediate success under pressure, feels less like a coming-of-age milestone and more like narrative convenience. Harry's execution of the Patronus also feels at odds with the rules of magical learning elsewhere in the books. When Harry tries to learn occlumency with Snape, the results are disastrous. He fails repeatedly. He finds it difficult to control his thoughts and emotions, and Snape is far from an encouraging teacher. The failure seems authentic, but the occlumency lessons are peppered with frustration, resistance, and raw emotion. Meanwhile, the Patronus lessons, taught with far more kindness, are rapid and result in what amounts to magical perfection. Why is the spell that is famously hard and emotionally demanding, the one designed to protect the wizard from their darkest fears, so accessible to someone in the deepest grip of trauma? In the grander mythology of the series, Harry is constantly portrayed as a boy who is exceptional, not because he is the most powerful wizard, but because of his courage and moral clarity. The Patronus scene reflects this theme: courage over complexity. His determination to save Sirius, his belief that he has seen his father, and his refusal to give in to despair combine to form the emotional energy required to manifest the spell. Lupin later tells him, "You did well, very well indeed. I didn't expect you to do it so soon." The compliment comes with an undertone of disbelief. Even Lupin, who believes in Harry, is surprised by his success. Still, it is worth asking why the spell could not have been portrayed as something Harry mastered more gradually. In reality, trauma recovery is not linear. Harry's experiences with the Dementors are tied directly to the worst moments of his life, his parents' murder, his own powerlessness as a baby. These are not the kinds of memories one overcomes with a few late-night sessions in a classroom. They're not the sort of shadows dispelled by sheer willpower alone. Even in the wizarding world, where magic and emotion are tightly entwined, the sudden emergence of control over such a spell strains credibility. The narrative gains much from Harry's Patronus moment. It solidifies him as a capable, independent wizard. It visually and emotionally crowns his coming-of-age arc within the third book. He becomes his own savior, literally. He doesn't need Dumbledore or Sirius or Lupin to step in. He steps into the void and fills it himself. The beauty of the moment is undeniable. The literary symmetry, the emotional payoff, and the sense of inherited legacy are all carefully constructed. And yet one cannot shake the feeling that the spell's success is too neat, too tidy. The story needs Harry to save the day. And so he does, without faltering. Had the spell faltered, had Harry struggled once more before succeeding, the payoff might have felt more earned. Perhaps a first attempt producing only a mist, buying just enough time to survive, followed later by a real breakthrough, would have aligned better with the world's internal logic. But Rowling chooses a different path. The story's pace and thematic resonance seem to demand that the moment by the lake be flawless, and so Harry delivers a perfect Patronus not once, but twice, first in the moment and then again in time travel, both under intense pressure. Another layer worth examining is the way other characters' experiences with the spell are downplayed to highlight Harry's. Hermione Granger, arguably the most gifted student of their generation, is never shown producing a full Patronus during this period, nor is Ron. Their comparative silence on the matter elevates Harry's achievement. In a series that often balances the trio's strengths, this imbalance signals that the Patronus is not just another spell, it's a narrative symbol. Harry is the chosen one, not just by prophecy, but by action. The stag that bursts from his wand is not just a magical guardian, it is a literary device used to cement his status. Sirius Black's awe at the Patronus is also telling. When Harry explains what happened by the lake, Sirius seems both grateful and amazed. The man who knew James best sees his godson replicate one of James's greatest magical feats, but Sirius never questions how Harry mastered the spell so quickly. His silence, like that of so many others, reflects the author's choice to prioritize emotional impact over magical realism. By the time the fifth book arrives, Harry becomes the teacher of Dumbledore's army. He trains dozens of students to cast the Patronus. The spell, once rare and nearly mythic, becomes a common goal among schoolchildren. This democratization of the charm undercuts the earlier framing of its difficulty. It makes Harry's earlier success seem less extraordinary, or perhaps retrospectively, it implies that the spell is more about mental clarity than raw power. But this retroactive rationalization does little to erase the narrative convenience of the lake scene. Ultimately, the Patronus moment in The Prisoner of Azkaban remains powerful, visually, emotionally, symbolically. It ties together Harry's past, his identity, and his capacity for good. But for all its beauty, it also simplifies a deeply complicated spell into a vehicle for character development. Harry's triumph is satisfying because we want it to be, but when placed under a more critical lens, it's clear that the scene bends the rules of magical learning, emotional realism, and narrative pacing in favor of dramatic necessity. And while the series often blurs the line between realism and metaphor, this is one moment where that line dissolves entirely, allowing a miraculous success to slip through without question. Number 20, Dumbledore's army just happens to find the Room of Requirement. Of all the marvels hidden within the walls of Hogwarts, perhaps none is more suspiciously convenient than the Room of Requirement. When Dumbledore's army was still just a hopeful idea, a whispered dream of resistance against the tightening grip of the Ministry, it was not strength, nor spells, nor even strategy that first turned the tide in favor of Harry Potter and his friends. It was luck, or perhaps something more deliberate. At the precise moment when they needed it most, the castle offered them a gift, a room that should have remained mythical, a secret that should have been forever buried in stone. The Room of Requirement was no ordinary secret passage or unused classroom. It appeared only when someone truly needed it, forming itself around the desire in that person's heart. It was Neville Longbottom who first stumbled upon it, though even he didn't realize what he had discovered at the time. He was searching for a bathroom and found himself in a room full of chamber pots. Later, Dobby the house elf mentioned it to Harry, describing a very nice room that appears when someone walks past it 3 times thinking of what they need, and suddenly this random fragment of lore, this tale told by a creature who had once ironed his own hands in shame, became the keystone to the resistance. It would be easy to brush this aside as a quirky magical coincidence, but it strains credibility. The Room of Requirement not only appeared at the perfect moment, it appeared in the perfect form. As Harry described it, the room was warm and welcoming, brightly lit, and spacious enough to accommodate dozens of students practicing spells. It had cushions for stunners, shelves of books on defensive magic, and an atmosphere of calm authority. This wasn't just a hidden alcove, it was a fortress of knowledge and safety conjured from nowhere. One must remember that Hogwarts is a vast, labyrinthine castle filled with secrets. Hidden chambers, moving staircases, and ghost-infested corridors are common, but the Room of Requirement is different, not just hard to find, but impossible to find unless the castle itself decides to reveal it. And that raises a larger question. Why does it reveal itself now? Why to Harry? Why not in the past, when countless students must have felt similar desperation? Why didn't it appear for Sirius Black during his final years of imprisonment, or for the Marauders when they plotted their mischief, or even for Severus Snape as he walked the lonely halls in torment? The room does not merely appear, it conspires, it chooses. Its emergence during the rise of Dumbledore's army feels less like a fortunate accident and more like narrative intervention. The stakes had risen, Dolores Umbridge had seized control, the curriculum had been gutted, and students were forbidden to learn the very magic that might one day save their lives. The rebellion needed a secret headquarters, and the story needed a believable way to provide one. So the Room of Requirement stepped onto the stage, as if prompted by an invisible playwright. When the room is first introduced, there is a rush of wonder, but also a subtle unease. Harry, Hermione, and Ron had no plan beyond gathering students who might be brave enough to defy Umbridge. They had no location, no safety net, no path forward. Then, just in time, a magical solution appears. The room offers everything: privacy, equipment, protection, even adaptability. As Hermione observes with amazement, it even has cushions for practicing stunning spells. This isn't just a helping hand, it's a miracle. Consider the other times Hogwarts has responded to the needs of students. The staircases move, but not always in a helpful way. The Forbidden Forest looms, but rarely offers aid. Peeves the poltergeist actively makes things worse. Yet the Room of Requirement operates with eerie precision. When the students need a safe place to learn, it becomes a classroom. When Draco Malfoy needs a place to repair the vanishing cabinet, it becomes a room of hidden things. When Harry needs to find the lost diadem of Ravenclaw, it turns into a labyrinth of forgotten objects. It is a chameleon, yes, but one that changes at the perfect moment for the plot. This convenience stretches plausibility when we consider how little is known about the room. Albus Dumbledore himself knew of it, but even he had never fully explored its potential. In Half-Blood Prince, he admits to having used it once when he needed a bathroom. That's all. A man who spent decades studying Hogwarts secrets never considered that the room might offer more? Or did he know and simply withhold the knowledge, waiting for the right moment? Dumbledore's manipulation of events is well documented. Perhaps he told Dobby about the room, knowing the elf's loyalty to Harry would do the rest. The Room of Requirement becomes not just a magical setting, but a character, a silent guardian that watches over Harry and his allies. When Umbridge intensifies her regime, the room becomes the last bastion of hope. When the inquisitorial squad searches the school, it shields the students. It is not found by the adults despite their power and authority. It remains invisible to Filch, to Umbridge, to the Ministry itself. How is this possible unless the room wishes it to be? In fiction, there is a concept known as the deus ex machina, literally, God from the machine. It describes a sudden, improbable solution to an unsolvable problem, often descending from the sky like divine intervention. The Room of Requirement in this light is a textbook example. The characters are trapped, the world is closing in, and then a divine solution arrives. But unlike the ancient Greek plays where a god appears on a crane in Harry Potter, it is a room with pillows and books. There is also the issue of permanence. If the room is truly so powerful and responsive, why does it vanish so easily? After the Battle of Hogwarts, after the destruction of the diadem and the fire conjured by Crabbe, the room is never mentioned again. Its potential to solve countless future problems is ignored. Does it simply cease to exist, or has its purpose been fulfilled like a character written out of a script? The timing of its appearances and disappearances is too exact to be random. Even the fact that Dobby, of all beings, delivers the information about the room feels orchestrated. Dobby's connection to Harry is deep and emotional, but his access to Castle's secrets seems implausibly broad. He knows things that professors do not. He wanders freely, he overhears, he serves as the messenger for narrative devices, and when he tells Harry about the room, it feels less like character development and more like a whisper from the author herself. The Room of Requirement fits perfectly into the theme of Hogwarts as a sentient force. The school moves, reacts and evolves with its students. But even in this context, the room's precision is startling. It doesn't just help, it enables. It doesn't just respond, it prepares. It is as if the castle itself wants Harry to succeed. The room becomes the hidden hand that guides the story forward, shaping resistance from within. By the time Dumbledore's army is fully formed, the room has become almost mythic. Students enter and emerge with new confidence. Luna Lovegood, Neville Longbottom and Ginny Weasley hone their skills, no longer passive side characters but warriors. The room transforms them, it nurtures their growth, it gives them identity. And all of it stems from an encounter that was, ostensibly, accidental. Yet is it truly accidental? In a world where prophecy dictates destiny, where wands choose wizards, and where love leaves lasting protection, nothing happens without cause. The room's emergence fits the story too cleanly. It provides exactly what is needed, then recedes into silence. It is the embodiment of narrative convenience, an elegant solution to a structural problem. The rebellion needs a headquarters, the children need training, the author needs a believable hiding place. And the room provides. The question becomes not whether the Room of Requirement is believable, but whether it matters. The magic of Hogwarts has always bent toward Harry. The Sorting Hat considers his choice. Fawkes saves him. The Sword of Gryffindor appears when needed. Again and again the story rewards him not just with luck, but with destiny itself. The Room of Requirement is simply the most striking example of this trend. Some may argue that magic, by its nature, is meant to be wondrous, that the room of requirement is no more absurd than Time Turner's horcruxes or the Elder Wand. But each of those comes with rules, dangers, and consequences. The room of requirement has none. It arrives like a gift, grants sanctuary, and disappears. It is the ultimate magical loophole, a place of no cost and infinite benefit. And perhaps that is what makes it feel so manufactured. In a series filled with hardship, sacrifice, and death, the room offers reprieve without risk. It never betrays, it never fails. It is the castle's perfect gift to its favourite son. And while the heart may rejoice in its presence, the mind cannot help but wonder, what game is Hogwarts playing and whose side is it really on? The room of requirement, then, is not just a room. It is a mirror reflecting the mechanics of storytelling. It shows us what the narrative needs before we realize it ourselves. It anticipates the hero's struggles and answers them before they are even voiced. And in doing so, it blurs the line between fate and fiction, between coincidence and construction. A room that appears only when needed, or a plot device in disguise, wearing the robes of wonder. Perhaps in the end, they are one and the same. Number 21. Voldemort chooses his own downfall by targeting Harry. Of all the grand ironies seeded throughout the tale of Harry Potter, none is as poetically crafted or suspiciously convenient as the fact that Voldemort, in his relentless thirst for immortality, for power, for domination, ends up creating his own worst enemy. The Dark Lord, feared across the wizarding world and shrouded in mystery, paranoia, and whispered dread, makes one decision that changes the course of history. He chooses Harry Potter. He chooses a baby who had done nothing more than be born at the end of July. And by doing so, he sets into motion a chain of events that would eventually unravel every piece of his empire. This is not merely irony. This is storytelling machinery at its most visible, so visible, in fact, that one begins to question whether Voldemort's fall was ever truly earned by the hero or merely granted by a writer's hand. The prophecy spoken by Sybil Trelawney during her interview with Albus Dumbledore at the Hog's Head Inn could have referred to either Harry Potter or Neville Longbottom. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month, dies. Both boys fit the criteria. Neville was born on July 30th, Harry on July 31st. Both sets of parents were members of the Order of the Phoenix, and both had defied Voldemort 3 times. But Voldemort, with all his cunning, his spies, and his manipulation, zeroes in on one child, Harry. He chose the boy he thought most likely to be a threat to him, Dumbledore explains in Order of the Phoenix. That choice, seemingly logical from Voldemort's perspective, is where everything begins to crack. For in that moment, Voldemort doesn't simply attempt to kill a child, he marks him, unintentionally, as his equal. By attacking Harry, by casting the Avada Kedavra that rebounded upon himself, he not only destroyed his own body, but fractured his soul and transferred a piece of it into the boy. This is not simply a twist of fate, it is a storytelling mechanism that turns the protagonist into something special, not by his own efforts, nor through a slow evolution, but because the antagonist, quite literally, pours his own power into him. And he shall have power the dark. Lord knows not, the prophecy adds. But this power, as it turns out, may not be some mystical trait born of destiny. It is Voldemort's power mirrored through Harry, the result of a decision made in arrogance and fear. The fact that Harry survives the attack at all already stretches the limits of magical rules explained later as a consequence of Lily Potter's sacrificial protection. Yet even this magical explanation ties directly into Voldemort's own hubris. He could have used any method to kill the Potters. He could have waited, manipulated, used a surrogate. But no, he, in his overconfidence, marches into Godric's Hollow himself, slaughters James, brushes Lily aside, and casts the killing curse with his own wand. This is not a tactical warlord at work. This is a man with a messiah. Complex, and his failure is less the result of heroic resistance and more the consequence of a narrative setup that insists upon poetic justice. One cannot ignore how perfectly this decision ties every thread together. Harry is the chosen one, not because of destiny, not because of a lineage, not because of a prophecy written in the stars, but because Voldemort chooses him. It is Voldemort who grants him the scar, Voldemort who gifts him Parseltongue, Voldemort who makes Harry's life a magnet for danger. All the traits that make Harry stand out among his peers are things done to him, not things he earns. Even Dumbledore acknowledges this uncomfortable truth, stating in Half-Blood Prince, "You are the true master of death, because the true master does not seek to run away from death." But that path only opens to Harry because Voldemort, in trying to escape death, hands Harry every tool he would need to oppose him. It becomes increasingly difficult to ignore the elegance of the narrative convenience. Had Voldemort chosen Neville, everything could have changed. Perhaps the Longbottoms would have been targeted and killed, and Voldemort's body would still have been destroyed. But perhaps not. Perhaps Neville would not have survived the killing curse. Perhaps there would be no prophecy-fulfilling child, and Voldemort's power would have grown unchecked. The mere possibility exposes the fragility of the entire premise. That such a universe-altering decision hinges on the Dark Lord's guess, on his own interpretation of a prophecy he only partially heard, feels suspiciously authorial. This is not fate. This is narrative design wearing a mask. And if it were merely a case of Voldemort creating a symbolic adversary, the story might still stand on shaky ground, but the layers run deeper. Harry doesn't just survive, he gains a connection to Voldemort's mind, his thoughts, his emotions. He becomes a vessel for the Dark Lord's rage, visions, and impulses. In Order of the Phoenix, this connection is used to devastating effect as Voldemort manipulates Harry into breaking into the Department of Mysteries. Again, the plot advances not through the actions of the hero, but through the mechanisms granted to him by the villain. Without that connection, there would be no revelation, no prophecy retrieval, no battle in the Ministry. Voldemort shapes the entire journey, and Harry is simply swept along the path laid before him. Even the final confrontation in Deathly Hallows is driven by this unnatural connection. Harry understands the Elder Wand's allegiance because he has access to Voldemort's mind. He learns the location of Nagini. He pieces together the Horcrux puzzle not through raw intellect or strategy, but through information gleaned from the very enemy he seeks to destroy. The question must be asked, if Voldemort had not chosen Harry, would any of this have been possible? Would there have been a hero at all? Or does Harry only become one because the antagonist, in his error, hands him the keys? This isn't a critique of Harry's bravery. His decisions, his sacrifices, his morality, those are deeply human and admirable. But the core of his power, his uniqueness, his destiny, is constructed by the antagonist's misstep. The concept of a chosen one is thereby deconstructed not into a narrative of divine fate, but into a tale of coincidence. As Dumbledore confesses in Half-Blood Prince, it was the Dark Lord who singled you out as the boy who would be his downfall. He chose the boy he thought most likely to be a danger to him. In doing so, he fulfills the prophecy himself, closing the loop in a paradox that renders the entire chain of events a circular justification. It is worth considering that the prophecy, without Voldemort's belief in it, might have amounted to nothing. Dumbledore himself points out this flaw. The prophecy does not hold power until someone acts upon it. In essence, he says, Voldemort himself made you what you are. The message is unsettling. If prophecy only gains weight when someone decides to fulfill it, then what of free will? What of heroism born from struggle rather than narrative convenience? The story, despite its emotional highs and gripping arcs, is built on the premise that the villain's mistake is the true engine of fate. This retroactively robs Harry of some agency. Had he grown into power, forged his own path, discovered his identity and magical prowess without Voldemort's interference, the narrative would carry the weight of earned victory. But instead, each major transformation in Harry's life, his fame, his orphanhood, his magical scar, his Horcrux connection, even his survival of the final Avada Kedavra, are all gifts, in a twisted sense, from Voldemort. He is shaped in his enemy's image, defined by what was done to him, not by what he chose to become. It is a paradox that, while elegant, dilutes the rawness of heroism. What makes this even more narratively convenient is how Voldemort's decision also exonerates the wizarding world from blame. The community that turned a blind eye to rising tyranny, that failed to protect its people, that left orphaned children in abusive homes, it is not held accountable. Instead, blame is laid at the feet of one man's arrogance, allowing the rest of the world to celebrate Harry without reflecting on its own failures. The villain creates the hero, and in doing so, absorbs all the guilt. The brilliance of this setup is not in its logic, but in its theatrical symmetry. The boy who lived is the boy who was chosen, not by the stars, but by the monster. It is clean, poetic, memorable, but it is also suspect. When a story gives so much power to a single moment of villainous miscalculation, it can feel like a shortcut, a neat bow tied atop an otherwise chaotic world. This undermines the organic chaos that such a universe should represent. The aftermath of Voldemort's decision is just as suspiciously tailored. Every obstacle Harry faces, Quirrell, the diary, the Triwizard Trap, the connection to Nagini, is a byproduct of Voldemort's existence. There are no threats outside of what Voldemort creates. The story becomes a loop of self-feeding conflict. Voldemort creates the problem, and Voldemort indirectly creates the solution. Harry simply walks the path, a reluctant messiah drawn into a war, not of his own making, but one he must finish, because the story demands it. Had Voldemort chosen Neville, it is possible that Neville would have died that night, and the prophecy would have fizzled. Perhaps Voldemort would have continued his reign, or perhaps, in attacking the wrong boy, Voldemort would still have fallen, but without creating an equal. In either case, Harry would remain an ordinary boy, no scar, no fame, no prophecy. The story we know would vanish, its tension deflated by the simple act of an antagonist making a different choice. This singular moment, then, the choice Voldemort makes, is the narrative keystone. Without it, the entire arc collapses. That's a heavy burden for one decision to bear. And the fact that it bears it so well, so perfectly, makes one wonder whether the world of Harry Potter truly rests on the shoulders of fate or on the scaffolding of literary design. For in Voldemort's desperation to prevent his downfall, he not only seals his fate, but constructs brick by brick the pedestal upon which his destroyer stands. It is a story of irony, yes, but it is also a story of control, not by the characters but by the architecture of plot. Voldemort's error is too perfect, his downfall too poetic. The child he marks becomes the very weapon of his undoing, not by chance, not by struggle, but because he chooses him. It is convenient, it is elegant, and it is perhaps the most suspicious moment in the entire saga. Number 22, Dobby dies at the most emotionally painful moment. When Bellatrix Lestrange raised her wand and demanded to know where they had gotten the sword of Gryffindor, the walls of Malfoy Manor seemed to close in on Harry. Hermione was screaming, Ron was howling in protest, trapped downstairs with the Snatchers. Lucius was frantic, his reputation with Voldemort hanging by a thread. And Harry, bound and bleeding, looked around with rising despair, realizing that they had walked straight into the enemy's den. The atmosphere was thick with dread, and in that moment everything appeared hopeless. But then, like a breath of divine intervention, Dobby appeared, the same Dobby who once ironed his hands as punishment, the same Dobby who had always spoken with a high-pitched, trembling voice and a ferocious loyalty that belied his timid frame. He arrived not with bluster, but with quiet, deadly efficiency, and within seconds, everything changed. The house elf moved with surprising precision, disarming Narcissa Malfoy and stunning her without warning. He didn't hesitate. He didn't falter. He simply acted. In a house swarming with Death Eaters, filled with barriers and protections set by some of the darkest witches and wizards in Britain, Dobby not only found a way in, but struck with impact. He destroyed the chandelier. He disrupted Bellatrix. He teleported Luna Lovegood, Dean Thomas, and Ollivander out of the manor. And in those moments, it became unmistakably clear Dobby was powerful, more powerful than the narrative had ever allowed us to see. And yet, when it mattered most, when freedom was at hand, Dobby died. A silver knife, thrown by Bellatrix with a flick of her wrist, found its mark in his chest just after he had apparated the group to safety. He collapsed on the shore, whispering his final words in Harry's arms. Such a beautiful place to be with friends. And the story, as told, transforms this into a heartbreaking climax. The humble house elf who once begged Harry not to return to Hogwarts now lays down his life for him. The emotion is raw, the impact is unforgettable. But beneath that beautifully constructed moment lies a question that nags at the edges of reason. Was this genuine storytelling, or was it convenient plotting? Dobby's death is one of the most effective gut punches in the series, but the more one considers the scene, the more its construction begins to fray. Dobby was able to bypass the powerful magical protection surrounding Malfoy Manor, protection strong enough to prevent humans from apparating. Not only that, he navigated the building, located key individuals, stunned adversaries, and rescued the prisoners with no forewarning or help. Such feats suggest a form of magic even Voldemort would envy. So why, in a franchise where protective enchantments are emphasized so heavily, was this power not leveraged more often? It is never fully explained why house elves can apparate where wizards cannot. The books merely state that house elves have their own kind of magic. But this vague explanation sidesteps a more pressing problem. If house elves like Dobby are capable of such powerful intervention, why aren't they used more strategically during the war? Why didn't the Order of the Phoenix or even Dumbledore organize a network of elf operatives to gather intelligence, deliver supplies, or extract prisoners? It's never addressed. And the timing of Dobby's arrival, precise, perfect, impossibly convenient, only sharpens the sense that his sacrifice was not only emotional, but manufactured. Even the means of his death raise questions. The blade that kills Dobby is Bellatrix's dagger. It is not enchanted. It holds no special magical properties. Dobby, who had just overcome 2 adult witches with wandless magic and managed to teleport a group of people out of a fortress, is struck down by a mundane object. The dissonance here is sharp. How is it that such a mighty magical being cannot deflect, evade, or shield himself from a simple throw? He did, after all, just take down Death Eaters and dodge spells. The book states, the silver knife had pierced Dobby's side, but gives no justification for why he couldn't protect himself. Not a moment of warning, not a burst of defensive energy, just sudden, absolute finality. It's hard not to notice how perfect the timing is. Harry is on the edge. His mission feels like it's crumbling. Hermione has been tortured. The group is in tatters. They need a reason to believe again. Dobby's death becomes that moment of unifying grief, forcing Harry into a new kind of maturity. It's a turning point, emotionally resonant and narratively sharp, but also suspiciously well placed. The trope of the sacrificial ally dying just as hope is restored is a well-worn literary device, and Dobby fits this mold perfectly. It's hard to shake the feeling that the plot demanded a death, and the house elf was chosen because he was just expendable enough to hurt, but not enough to derail the core trio. There's also an elephant in the room. If Dobby had this ability to break through magical protections, why didn't he help earlier? The trio had been captured. Griphook was in chains. Luna and Ollivander were imprisoned for months. Yet Dobby, who was working at Shell Cottage and in contact with Aberforth and Creature, only appears when the stakes have peaked and the tension is at its highest. The explanation given in the book is simply that someone told him where they were. But that raises a larger issue. If finding people and extracting them is this easy, then why wasn't it standard operating procedure? In Book 5, the members of the Order struggle mightily to locate and rescue Sirius. In Book 6, Dumbledore must go through complex magical defenses to reach the Horcrux. In Book 7, the trio nearly dies multiple times because they can't apparate into dangerous places. But here comes Dobby, using elf magic to shatter the internal logic of the world in one glorious, tragic moment. The cost is high, we cry, but the scaffolding creaks under the weight of narrative convenience. The scene works because we feel it, but when we think it through, the spell begins to wear off. And then there's the question of Dobby himself. He had been free for years. He had developed a fierce sense of agency. His loyalty to Harry is touching, but why does he risk his life alone, with no backup, in a place crawling with murderers, when his magic clearly outclasses everyone there? If Dobby had survived, would the war have ended sooner? Could he have snuck into Voldemort's hideouts? Could he have destroyed horcruxes undetected? We'll never know. Because the story decided he had to die, not for logical reasons, but for emotional impact. This is not to say the moment is unearned, far from it. The build-up to Dobby's redemption has been subtle and consistent. From his introduction in Chamber of Secrets, he has been depicted as a character driven by a desire to do what is right, regardless of the cost. He disobeys masters, he punishes himself for freedom, he clings to loyalty like a life raft. So when he says Dobby has come to rescue Harry Potter, we believe him, we cheer for him. But it's a cheer tinted with the suspicion that he's walking into a trap laid not by Death Eaters, but by the author herself. The series has many such moments where emotional highs are accompanied by curious absences of logic. Cedric's death in Goblet of Fire is sudden and shocking, but raises questions about the cup as a portkey and Voldemort's strategy. Sirius's death in Order of the Phoenix is famously vague, prompting debates about whether he really had to die at all. But Dobby's death feels uniquely crafted for heartbreak. He doesn't die in battle, he doesn't die in vain, he dies after succeeding, after saving, after completing his mission, which in any other scenario should have been cause for celebration. The knife could have missed, Bellatrix could have failed, Dobby could have ducked, but the plot needed pain, it needed sacrifice, and it chose the one character who had become pure, loyal, and beloved. It hurts because we loved him, it works because it hurts, but it lingers because it doesn't quite make sense. Rowling knew what she was doing. She gave us a catharsis wrapped in tragedy, but she also bent the rules of her own world to do it. Consider, too, the framing of the moment, the beach, the stars, Harry digging the grave by hand. These are not incidental details, they are symbols of innocence, of passage, of mourning. Harry uses no magic because the death was not magical. It was personal, it was final. But this symbolic beauty also serves as a kind of misdirection. We are lulled by the emotion into ignoring the mechanics. We don't ask why a house elf with teleportation abilities was vulnerable to a blade. We don't wonder why help arrived only at the climax. We accept the loss because the story demands it. And yet these are fair questions. The logic of the wizarding world, as established over 6 books, suggests layers of magical checks, protections, and impossibilities. House elves, it turns out, bypass them all, but only once, only here, only when it serves the emotional crescendo. This is not a critique of character, but of construction. A story must move the heart, but when it defies its own rules to do so, it leaves behind a trace of unease. So we remember Dobby's final words, we remember Harry's silent grief, we remember the freshly dug grave, the sock, the marker. It's one of the most poetic scenes in the series, but even poetry can be questioned. Even magic, when used too precisely, begins to feel mechanical. Dobby's death was beautiful, it was powerful, but it was also suspiciously convenient, and that, more than anything, is what gives it lasting power, not only as a moment of loss, but as a reminder of how fragile even the strongest magic can be when story demands come first. Number 23, Harry doesn't realize he speaks Parseltongue until the story needs it. In the reptile house of the zoo, surrounded by the constant chatter of visitors and the bored sighs of the Dursleys, something seemingly minor unfolded that would one day echo through the entire wizarding world. Harry Potter, then just a boy with no knowledge of magic, stood quietly before a glass tank, staring at a motionless boa constrictor. It was meant to be an ordinary outing, meant to reinforce his unimportance in the grand scheme of his relatives' lives. But the moment he looked into the serpent's eyes, the impossible happened. The glass vanished, the snake slithered out. It looked back, nodded and hissed, "Thanks, amigo." To any reader, this was a spark of magic, a thrilling crack in the ordinary world. But to those who later learned the truth of what occurred, the implications should have been terrifying. It is hard to overstate how rare the ability to speak Parseltongue is in the wizarding world. The language of serpents, understood and spoken by only a handful of witches and wizards throughout history, is not just rare, it is feared. Parseltongue is not taught, not learned in textbooks and not encouraged. It emerges unbidden in those with a very specific magical lineage. Its most infamous speaker, Tom Riddle, used it to control the Basilisk hidden within the Chamber of Secrets. It is the mark of a connection to Salazar Slytherin himself, and it is intimately entwined with dark magic. And yet in the very first magical incident we witness involving Harry, this language makes a dramatic entrance. No one explains how it is possible that Harry, a child raised entirely in the Muggle world with no known connection to dark magic, could understand and speak to his snake in the middle of a zoo. Dumbledore, who later admits to knowing about Harry's Parseltongue ability, never confronts him about it in any meaningful way. He never sits him down to say, "This is unusual, this is dangerous, we should be careful." Instead, the event is brushed aside as just another magical outburst of a young boy, but what if it wasn't? One must consider how incredibly convenient it is, narratively, that Harry's first known magical act, one that reveals an ability shared with Voldemort, is both public and unnoticed. The Dursleys see only the disappearance of the glass. They do not hear the hissing, nor question Harry's strange behavior. A moment that should have raised alarm bells for the Ministry of Magic, Hogwarts staff, or at the very least the wizarding public, is left in the dark. This event never makes it into Dumbledore's discussions with Harry. When the boy later speaks Parseltongue during his second year, Dumbledore acts surprised only for a moment before returning to calm, measured concern. It seems inconceivable that he had forgotten the zoo incident. The moment is almost too well timed. It occurs just before Harry receives his Hogwarts letter, just before the reader is fully introduced to the magical world. It marks the threshold between the mundane and the fantastical. It is undeniably thrilling, but it is also suspiciously perfect, as if the moment were designed not to reflect Harry's actual magical progression, but to seduce the reader into curiosity. The boy in the cupboard talks to snakes. What else might he be? Rowling describes the incident in vivid detail, making sure the reader recognizes the strangeness of what has happened. The snake suddenly opened its beady eyes. Slowly, very slowly, it raised its head until its eyes were on a level with Harry's. The connection is intimate, eerie, and immediate. It is not a wild explosion of magic, like blowing up a great aunt or making glass disappear randomly. It is targeted, controlled. It even carries intention as the snake thanks Harry before leaving. This is not the magic of an uncontrolled child. It is conscious, almost adult in its design. Later, revelations only deepen the mystery. In the Chamber of Secrets, Ron Weasley expresses horror when he learns Harry can speak Parseltongue. "That's what you did at the zoo," he exclaims. Even at age 12, Ron knows how ominous this gift is. Hermione, ever the scholar, reads up on it and links it directly to Salazar Slytherin. And yet none of these clever young minds, nor the headmaster who watches over them, stops to say, wait, how did this happen in the first place? Dumbledore's silence on the matter grows more haunting the more one reflects on it. He knows of the Horcrux. He knows that a piece of Voldemort's soul latched on to Harry the night his parents died. He tells Snape as much in the Deathly Hallows, revealing that he must die because he carries that fragment within him. But if Dumbledore knows this, and he knows that the fragment gives Harry access to Voldemort's abilities, why doesn't he act sooner? Why doesn't he protect Harry from the mental invasion, the dark link, the whispers in Parseltongue that could shape his very soul? The answer, as always, lies not in the logic of the wizarding world, but in the needs of the story. The snake scene works because it is dramatic, mysterious, and perfectly placed. It hooks the reader. It raises just enough questions without overwhelming, but that elegance comes at a price. In the reality of the world Rowling built, such an event should have drawn scrutiny, fear, and action. Instead, it is allowed to drift into the background until it can be used again for greater dramatic effect in Harry's second year. This manipulation of timing becomes more evident when considering Harry's complete lack of prior encounters with the ability. If he was born with it, if Voldemort's soul had been in him since infancy, why had he never accidentally spoken to a lizard, a frog, or a pet store snake before? He had spent a decade in a cupboard. Surely something had crawled near him in that time, and yet nothing ever spoke back until that precise day in the zoo, in front of an audience, just before his magical identity is revealed. The idea that this moment is the first trigger for his Parseltongue is even more suspicious when one considers that the snake not only responds but initiates a kind of mutual respect. Brazil, here I come. Thanks, amigo. The snake's tone is not merely grateful, it is personal. It recognizes Harry as kin. That is no small thing. For a serpent to address a wizard in friendship implies not just understanding, but recognition of lineage. Harry is not just a speaker, he is one of them. In The Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore tells Harry, "You are protected, in short, by your ability to love." But that doesn't explain why he wasn't protected from becoming a vessel for dark magic. The story frequently reminds us that love is Harry's power, his unique magic. But in this moment with the snake, we see something else, something more ambiguous. The boy shows empathy for the creature, yes, but he also exhibits control over a dark, alien form of communication. This is not the magic of love. This is the magic of legacy, of curse, of burden. If Dumbledore truly had Harry's safety as his highest priority, why not begin preparing him for what Parseltongue meant? Why wait until disaster strikes in the Chamber of Secrets to start revealing truths? The answer is once again narrative. The suspense of discovery serves the plot. The timing favors the story. The mystery unfolds at the reader's pace, not the character's. But that design erodes the internal logic of the magical world. Even the Ministry, which is notoriously paranoid about magical anomalies, fails to investigate the zoo incident. They monitor underage magic. They detect magical outbursts. How could they miss an entire glass wall disappearing at a Muggle zoo? Did they ignore it because it wasn't tied to a wand? Did they look the other way because it suited Dumbledore's plans? Or, more chillingly, did someone suppress the report? It's tempting to believe that the snake scene is innocent, a child discovering his power. But the deeper one looks, the harder it becomes to accept. This is a moment of profound significance. A boy, still unaware of who he is, demonstrates a magical ability so specific and rare it is virtually exclusive to one bloodline. And he does it with no training, no provocation, and no consequences. There is something haunting in that first hiss. It isn't just a snake thanking a boy, it's the first whisper of something darker, something ancient moving inside Harry. Voldemort is not yet resurrected, the chamber is still closed, but the shadow has already begun to stir. The magic has already begun to call out. This moment, this zoo visit, should have been the beginning of an investigation, a turning point, a red flag. Instead, it's a dazzling spectacle, a narrative sleight of hand that offers wonder while hiding danger. It's effective, it's dramatic, and it's far too convenient. Even Harry himself does not dwell on the event. The story moves quickly to letters, owls, and Hogwarts. The snake is left behind, and with it, the question of what truly happened that day. Why did it happen then, and why did it feel like the beginning of something terrible in disguise? The scene remains one of the most charged and narratively perfect moments in Philosopher's Stone, but also one of its most quietly unsettling. It masquerades as an awakening, a sign of hope, but in hindsight it is a prophecy in disguise, a sign not of Harry's uniqueness, but of the dark destiny buried within him, a destiny no one wanted to acknowledge too early because the story was not ready to reveal it. Not yet. Number 24, Voldemort forgets legilimency at the worst time. In the dense silence of the Forbidden Forest, a boy walked alone toward death. Every shadow between the trees seemed to breathe, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. Harry Potter, heart thudding but hands steady, approached the clearing where Lord Voldemort waited. Around him stood a ring of Death Eaters, faceless and rigid, cloaked in black like a circle of death. Harry did not tremble. He had made peace with the truth. He was the final piece, the last horcrux. Sacrifice was the only way. But Voldemort, the man whose paranoia once twisted entire generations, did not stop him to ask questions. He raised the Elder Wand and cast the killing curse without hesitation. This act, so swift, so final, glittered with an illusion of certainty. But this certainty was Voldemort's blind spot. The Dark Lord, whose power once lay in his obsessive control and ruthless caution, made a mistake so glaring it throbbed like a crack in reality. He never tried to read Harry's mind. He never checked if the boy was lying. The man who had once forced truth out of countless victims with legilimency, who had prided himself on understanding every mind he broke, now relied solely on assumption. In this forest, surrounded by silence and death, he trusted a gamble. In Deathly Hallows, Voldemort kills Harry with a single Avada Kedavra. The green light flashes, the forest sighs, and Harry falls. But Voldemort, the master of suspicion, doesn't verify the victory. He orders Narcissa Malfoy to confirm Harry's death, an odd delegation, considering her loyalties, and even more striking considering Voldemort's powers. He does not bend over Harry's body. He does not use legilimency to peer into the shadows of Harry's mind. He does not cast a detection charm. He simply believes, and that belief costs him everything. Voldemort's relationship with legilimency has been long established. In Order of the Phoenix, Snape explains to Harry, "The Dark Lord is highly skilled at legilimency," adding that you have no control over your emotions. Voldemort has used this ability to manipulate, to torment, and to unravel others. He used it against Harry before, even possessing him briefly at the Ministry of Magic. He has cracked open people's minds like eggs and found the truths he needed. So why, in this moment, the pivotal moment, does he not even try? The answer lies not in logic, but in plot. Voldemort, despite his endless suspicions, is scripted to forget his strengths when the story demands his failure. It is a necessary oversight, one that permits Harry's rebirth, the rebellion's rally, and the final fall of the Dark Lord. But from within the logic of the world, it is a glaring fracture. Voldemort, the ultimate puppet master, is made briefly stupid, not by design, but by narrative convenience. This convenience is even more shocking when considering how meticulous Voldemort is in other circumstances. He splits his soul into 7 pieces and hides them with arcane protections. He spies on Hogwarts. He recruits creatures of the dark, seeding his influence across the wizarding world. His paranoia is legendary. He does not trust his own Death Eaters, often punishing them for mere mistakes. He operates on a principle of suspicion, and yet, with Harry, his greatest threat, he chooses faith. There's irony in the fact that Voldemort, who mistrusts everyone, decides to trust Narcissa Malfoy, a woman whose child's life hangs in the balance. She bends over Harry and asks in a whisper, "Is Draco alive?" Harry answers yes. She lies to her master, and Voldemort believes her. In that moment he is defeated not by power, but by a lie he could have unravelled with a single thought, a single glance into Harry's mind, but instead he takes it as truth. "Harry Potter is dead," he announces, dragging the limp body back to the castle, and the war pivots on that lie. The failure is not just one of magic, but of character consistency. Voldemort's behaviour contradicts his own habits. In the past he's used legilimency on everyone from ministry officials to children. He prided himself on knowing what others hid. He had once told Bellatrix Lestrange that only fools trust blindly. But in the forest he becomes the fool. He ignores every red flag, every instinct that once defined his genius for control. Harry's appearance, calm, alone and silent, should have raised alarm. But Voldemort acts not like a predator, but like a pawn. This moment feels like narrative betrayal. A man who fears prophecy should have been suspicious when the prophecy's subject walks willingly to him. A man who survived by doubting everyone should have questioned the ease of Harry's approach. And a man who mastered mental magic should have used it in his hour of supposed triumph. But he does none of it. The story needs Harry to survive, and so Voldemort forgets who he is. There's an argument that Voldemort couldn't use legilimency because Harry had willingly sacrificed himself and the protection of Lily's blood now covered everyone. But this doesn't affect Voldemort's ability to try. Even if blocked, he would have sensed resistance. He could have felt the wall, the protection, and perhaps then guessed that something was amiss. Instead, he assumes success. He doesn't try to verify, he simply declares victory. We've seen Voldemort act more cautiously in less important moments. When retrieving the prophecy in the Department of Mysteries, he remains hidden, manipulating events through Lucius Malfoy. He doesn't expose himself until absolutely necessary. When seeking the Elder Wand, he murders Gregorovitch, then Grindelwald and finally Snape, calculating, hunting, destroying. But when he has Harry alive and unarmed, he behaves like a man who no longer thinks. He becomes sloppy. In earlier books, Voldemort is the king of strategy. In Goblet of Fire, he orchestrates an elaborate trap, planting Barty Crouch Jr., fixing the Triwizard Tournament, and dragging Harry to a graveyard. He performs rituals, tracks ancestry, and kills without hesitation. His mind is sharp, deadly. He leaves no gaps. But in Deathly Hallows he becomes strangely blunt. No deeper probing, no questions, just a curse and a boast. Harry Potter is dead. This flaw is not just an error of logic. It undermines the stakes. Readers familiar with Voldemort's abilities feel the weight of this omission. They know he could have known the truth. They understand he had the tools to win, and yet he loses, not because Harry outsmarts him in that moment, but because Voldemort momentarily forgets himself. That cheapens the victory. It dims the power of Harry's return, because Voldemort didn't fail. He just forgot to check. Even more strange is how legilimency plays a role in earlier scenes. In Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore teaches Harry about Voldemort's rise, revealing how Tom Riddle once used subtle manipulations and mind-reading to get his way. He infiltrates minds, controls conversations, and destroys willpower. He is a master of psychological warfare, and yet in his final duel, his psychology deserts him. The scene in the forest is iconic. It is rich with symbolism. Harry walking like Christ to his death, surrounded by disciples of darkness. But symbolism should not come at the cost of consistency. Voldemort had the power to know, and the story requires him not to use it. That is not a twist. That is convenience disguised as destiny. When Harry revives and the truth unravels, Voldemort never questions the moment. He never says, "How did I not see this?" He never demands an answer. He never reflects. And perhaps that is the ultimate irony. His greatest mistake is one he doesn't even realize he made. He dies without learning. He dies believing he was wise, even in his foolishness. In literature, character flaws should lead to downfall, hubris, cruelty, fear. These should be the undoing of the villain. But Voldemort's downfall comes not from character, but from omission. The plot requires a path for Harry's return, and so Voldemort is rewritten for one chapter into a man he never was. It's a betrayal of craft, because the reader deserved a cleverer duel, a tighter climax, one where Harry wins not because Voldemort forgets, but because Harry overcomes. It would have been so easy to include a failed attempt, a moment where Voldemort tries to read Harry's mind and finds it shielded. That alone would restore balance. It would honor Voldemort's intelligence while still preserving the story's magic. But that line was never written. That attempt never made. And the story suffers for it. This moment in the forest, therefore, becomes a symbol, not of victory, but of narrative fatigue, of a story racing toward its end, shedding complexity for symbolism. Voldemort becomes a shadow of himself, just long enough for Harry to rise. And that rise, though glorious, rests on a fragile foundation, the foundation of convenience, the foundation of a forgotten ability, the moment where the most dangerous mind in wizarding history chose not to think. Number 25. Dumbledore's will gives Harry the perfect items. Albus Dumbledore's death was not a surprise to readers familiar with the path of the hero. What came after, however, raised far more questions than answers. In the reading of his will, we find an almost mystical synchronicity between what Harry, Ron, and Hermione receive and what they eventually need. The Deluminator, the Golden Snitch, and the Tales of Beedle the Bard, each item a seemingly sentimental keepsake, later revealed to be a vital instrument in the trio's quest. The perfect timing of these items becoming useful, the precision with which they serve the story, and the mysterious foresight Dumbledore seems to possess all feel less like coincidence and more like a well-oiled narrative mechanism. The question that lingers isn't just how Dumbledore knew, it's whether the story could have unfolded at all without this orchestrated convenience. When Ron deserts his friends, the Deluminator becomes more than a trinket. It doesn't just bring back light, it guides him back to the heart of the story. "He must have known I'd run out on you," Ron says in the Deathly Hallows, half in shame and half in awe. But how could Dumbledore have predicted the precise moment of Ron's regret? How did he know that Ron would need not only guidance, but comfort? The sound of Hermione's voice carried on magical light? It's not a tool Ron ever asked for or showed interest in. It appears only once Dumbledore has died, only once the trio is fractured, and only once the story needs Ron back in its emotional climax. The Deluminator doesn't feel like an object from Dumbledore's past. It feels like something created for that exact narrative moment. Then there's the Golden Snitch, the one Harry caught with his mouth in his very first Quidditch match. Dumbledore leaves it to him with a curious message. "I open at the close." Not a hint, not a riddle with a solvable answer, but a prophecy wrapped in poetic ambiguity. This snitch contains the Resurrection Stone, one of the Deathly Hallows, but it won't reveal itself until Harry has made the choice to die. The logic is airtight only in hindsight. Dumbledore, we are told, suspected Harry was a horcrux. He also knew Voldemort feared death more than anything. But how could he have timed the gift so perfectly? Could he have known that Harry would walk alone into the Forbidden Forest at that moment in that state of mind, holding that very snitch? The delivery of the stone is flawless and impossibly convenient. Hermione, meanwhile, receives the Tales of Beedle the Bard, a children's book she's already read. At first glance, This gift seems patronizing, even absurd. But within its pages lies the tale of the three brothers, the first clue to the Deathly Hallows. It's only through this story that the trio begins to connect the dots: the Elder Wand, the Resurrection Stone, the Invisibility Cloak, and the symbolism again fits too well. Hermione, the rational one, must be the first to question myth. She dismisses the tale as a metaphor, but the book's physical presence forces her to revisit it, to reevaluate magic, not through logic, but legend. Dumbledore doesn't give her a speech, he gives her a bedtime story, and somehow it contains the key to defeating death itself. Each gift, we are told, was examined by the Ministry. Each gift, we know, arrived exactly when it was needed. The timing is flawless, the activation of each item perfectly synced with the trio's emotional arcs. The Deluminator glows when Ron regrets. The snitch opens when Harry embraces death. The book becomes relevant when logic fails. These aren't just magical artifacts. They are narrative switches, flipped precisely when the story demands it. In the real world, even the most brilliant of strategists cannot account for emotional timing, but Dumbledore, or rather the narrative that crafted him, does so without fault. What's more, these objects do not simply guide the characters, but they change them. Ron's return is not just physical, but spiritual. The Deluminator doesn't simply help him find his friends, it helps him find himself. Harry doesn't just discover the Resurrection Stone in the snitch, he accepts mortality. Hermione doesn't just read the story of the Deathly Hallows, she allows herself to believe. These items are not neutral tools, they are emotional accelerants, and in that they function more like literary devices than relics of a dead man's estate. Dumbledore, for all his wisdom, is not omniscient. He is flawed, secretive, and deeply manipulative. He withholds information, even from those he loves. "I cared more for your happiness than your knowing the truth," he tells Harry in King's Cross. And yet the will he leaves behind suggests perfect knowledge of the journey ahead. This contradiction lies at the heart of the plot's artificiality. If Dumbledore knew everything, why not explain more? If he knew nothing, how did his posthumous gifts align so perfectly with the path to victory? The answer is not found in logic. It is found in storytelling necessity.